Welcome to those of you who are tuning into the stream here at Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell, where we are offering truth without a muzzle. This is Tuesday morning, the 8th day of April, 2025. So we have an extremely explosive international environment with all kinds of dangers and complexities going on right now. And in the forefront are the threats of war instigating against Iran, and of economic and financial chaos within our own borders, from the U.S. tariff instigation hitting atop a monetarist, globalist debt system that's already in breakdown. And there is no prognosticating over where this is going to end by any means. Instead, the future kind of depends right now on acting on the opportunities to intervene. So yesterday afternoon, I think it's this afternoon. Trump announced to the media that this Saturday, April 12, no, excuse me, I'm so sorry, it was yesterday afternoon, of course. Today's just getting going. Where Trump announced to the media that this coming Saturday, April 12, there's going to be talks between the U.S. and Iran. And he gave no additional details or location or attendees except to say that the meeting would involve officials very near the very top level. This, of course, the top level in Iran was the supreme leader. I doubt that he will be there. This is very positive that this level of talks are going to be taking place. Even more so as it was said in the presence of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, sitting there rather silent next to Trump while Trump was making these announcements, who was visiting Washington, who's been pushing to attack Iran constantly amidst his warfare throughout the entire region, and of course his attempts to sabotage any remaining aspects of diplomacy. So it's estimated that the IDF forces are now on the ground in control of over 50% of the Gaza Strip. And the IDF gave orders over the past 24 hours for much of central Gaza to evacuate. Here we go again. I mean, to where? Where are they going to evacuate? Imagine a sizable portion. Let's say, I think the Salt Lake Valley from, let's say, Bountiful down to Lehigh. I know that's above and below Salt Lake Valley, but suppose 1.5 million. Well, I think there's well over 2 million people in that area I just described. Suppose they had been forcibly removed out to the West Desert, out to the Bonneville Salt Flats. And emergency crews weren't allowed to get to you, food couldn't get to you, water couldn't get to you. The people who were bringing food and water were being shot on sight. So they stopped bringing food and water. And you're out there, and all of a sudden, you're given the command to relocate to, I don't know, evacuate, I think is a better word, to evacuate the West Desert. It's not funny. It's the preposterousness, the insanity of this that my psychic relief is to laugh at things like this because I can't believe it's real. And so where are they going to go? Right now they're under the constant shelling and murder at the hands of the IDF. Netanyahu joined in with Trump at the White House to reiterate their degraded proposal from back in February that Palestinians, this is what they said, Palestinians would be better off if they left. Well, yeah, you think? You know, like probably a lot of the residents at the Utah State Prison in the northwest corner of the county would be better off if they left. At the same time yesterday in Cairo, the opposite version was put forward in a meeting hosted by Egyptian President El-Sisi with King Abdullah from Jordan and French President Macron. What's he doing there? And they issued a statement calling for emergency humanitarian aid to Gaza and for support of the reconstruction plans for the Palestinians in Gaza that Egypt had issued last March, I think, early March. And so it goes on. These and some other strategic events I'm going to get to unfold amidst this extreme turmoil going on in the Western stock exchanges. And I'm sure you've been watching this as a result of the tariffs. And these ominous kinks keep appearing in the supply lines, centers of physical production in many locations. One of the oddities I was just studying this morning before I got on here to talk to you is that a lot of the equipment that is necessary for all of this business startup that President Trump is, his tariffs, the bellicosity that's involved with a lot of this is just a starting dealing position of trade or barter or trying to get somebody's attention or whatever else, and that they back down from this once they can make deals. The deals, of course, are that we will drop our tariffs against your country if you will start making your stuff here. And that's already caught on in the auto industry. Canada's responding, Mexico's responding, South Korea is responding. The problem is the hardware, the infrastructure that is necessary for these massive businesses to do their massive production here, we don't have it. We have to import it from China. We do not have the stuff that is necessary to get a factory going that manufactures something from steel, which automobiles happen to be. So the proximate cause of all this chaos is President Trump's April 2nd, was that 6 days ago, the Liberation Day, announcing the 10% general tariff on goods coming from all countries, plus his so-called reciprocal country-by-country tariffs. You give us 35, we're going to charge you 35. You charge us 200, we're going to charge you 200. And so they're going to go into effect tomorrow. And they hit the top of the list of what's top of the decades of what's called global sourcing and enforced impoverishment and increasing debt burden on these poor nations at the same time. The destructuring of U.S., European, and so-called other advanced economies. And this old order should be replaced, pure and simple. Now, the big question is, what's going to happen first? Because you saw the market drop precipitously last week. Wait and see what the market does tomorrow when these reciprocals go into effect. So what's going to happen first? President Trump's success with his attempt to impose these new world trading sanctions, relations, or the crash of the whole system? And now comes another crazy factor. Yesterday, in the middle of the day, President Trump issued this raving ultimatum to China on tariffs. China had announced last Friday, April 4th, that if Trump's new tariffs on charges start tomorrow, April 9th, then China on April 10th will start a 34% tariff on all U.S. imports into China and implement certain other specified new import regulations. And then Trump declared after that China was acting above and beyond their already existing long-term tariff abuse of our nation. I'm quoting here, which will immediately be met with new and substantially higher tariffs over and above those initially set. Therefore, if China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, April 8th, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50%, effective April 9th. Additionally, all talks with China concerning the requested meetings He said, with us, we'll be terminated. Then he said negotiations would begin with other nations, and then he spoke with the Prime Minister of Japan, Ishiba, right after that. So, oh yeah, well, oh yeah, well, take this. Oh yeah, well, take this. So in contrast to the Trump administration's crazy views and his reactions to the globalist speculative system, because even though you've got this trading stuff and the tariff stuff that has, in some respects, actually produced some good results, I'll credit him with that, although it's going to tend to increase the inflation rate. And for how long and how much, I don't know. It also, above the tariff wars that are going on, is the impending blowout of the entire economic Western system. Hence, war. That's what they usually do, to turn to war. And that's what's getting pushed in the Middle East, because then it continues to fuel the economy with incredible debt structure to fund the war and at the same time keep the base economy going so that we can continue to make bullets and K rations. I know that's rather simplistic, but you get the idea. So in contrast, now let me put it this way. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who's the head of the Schiller Institute, put out a very interesting comment the other day. She said, the only thing which will remedy the economic crisis in the United States and elsewhere is to return to a sound physical economy principle, investment in science and technological progress, international space cooperation and innovation in general. And then she concluded with this: the trade imbalances will be removed by making the pie bigger, taking into account the different characteristics and levels of development of the individual economies and a fair division of labor. Humanity first will lead to a win-win outcome for everyone, in contrast, of course, to the idea of America first. America first is not going to work. There are too many other very powerful economies out there that want to be first. And they're only acting in the best interest of their own national sovereignty anyway, economic, financial, social, whatever, military. And this idea of America first soured me the first time I heard it. Yes, I'm an American. Yes, I love our Constitution. I would like to see a return to the Constitution. I really would. I would like to get lobbyists out of Washington. I would like to get the pharmaceutical industry out of our healthcare watchdogs. There's all kinds of things I'd like to do. I'd like to see the banning of seed oils and an acceleration of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. I'd like to see a lot of these things. But one thing that absolutely has to happen is humanity first. What do we have to do to save humanity on this planet? Let alone your right to sign your little boys and your little girls up to Little League Baseball that's going on right now. In fact, the signing up might be over, in order for you to enjoy the American pastime. The world is too close. It's not a series of distant, isolated nations from one another anymore. It's no longer an empire outside of the military control of it. It is a huge community of human beings who, working together, will produce a much greater, happier planet than any isolationist views right now. And you don't have to be isolationist in order to preserve your sovereignty. Now, for those of you on the stream, I'll continue. There's something that's playing, K-Talk or a commercial or something. No, apparently it was just a station. No, commercials are playing. I'll get back to the radio here in a few minutes. So, um, President, a little bit more detail on President Trump's announcement to begin high-level direct talks with Iran. Something the previous administration had a hard time doing. When you are throwing missiles and bombs and bullets at the opponent, and someone says, well, can't we just sit down and talk about these things? That's really a very hard thing to do when you are throwing bullets and bombs at the other side. That was this process of the State Department under Blinken during the previous administration. We have a new administration now that sees the wisdom of sitting down and talking with a supposed enemy. So in the Oval Office press conference with Netanyahu yesterday, and very interesting, I didn't see the whole thing, of course. I just saw little blips. And Netanyahu just sat there, totally passive, never said anything, never turned and looked at the president, while the president was kind of in his normal mode of presenting his ideas. I thought that was kind of interesting because usually when you look at the body language of somebody, and you're probably just as studious of body language as I am. I watch it all the time. I watch it with my patients during the day. I can usually tell where my patients are, regardless of what's coming out of their mouth. I can tell within 2 or 3 minutes by their body language what's really going on. And so I was watching Netanyahu's body language at the same time that Trump was announcing that the U.S. is going to start holding some very high-level direct talks with the Iranian government about its nuclear program to be held in Saudi Arabia this Saturday. And Trump, of course, gave no names of who's going to be involved in the talks with the Iranian or the U.S. side, but indicated the talks would take place at almost the highest level of the Iranian government. And as I said there in my opening comments, the highest level of the Iranian government is the supreme leader himself. I don't know that he ever leaves Iran. I don't know where he hangs out, but I don't know that he ever leaves. Anyway, when one reporter, during the presser that followed, one reporter asked whether an agreement with Iran would be like the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, that Trump stopped in his first administration. It was a six-nation agreement that was signed in 15, I think it was, in which Iran's nuclear program could be monitored, and from which Donald Trump withdrew a couple of years later during his first term in office. And Trump replied that a new agreement, what we're coming up with out of these talks, he says, will be better than the old JCPOA. But he didn't offer any details as to how or why. So in general, Netanyahu said very little. As I said, he expressed gratitude for Trump's friendship and support, but was very cautious in his use of words. So all these crazy ideas, when I'm watching this, the 2 or 3 minute blip on the news last night and this morning, and I'm watching this, and so when Netanyahu is thanking or expressing gratitude for Trump's friendship, I can just see Netanyahu reaching over and putting his arm around Trump, my little puppet here. I know some of you think that. I haven't surrendered to that idea yet. I still think Trump has a trump card he hasn't played yet. But on Iran's nuclear program, he suggested that perhaps it could be followed after the Libyan model, referring to the 2003 decision by Muammar Gaddafi to give up his country's weapons of mass destruction program and a nuclear weapons program that was only in the very earliest stages of development. And there was no further discussion on that. And then on Gaza, after proclaiming his commitment to secure the release of all hostages, he mentioned that his envoy, Steve Witkoff, was working on another deal. So Trump added that his plan to get the hostages out, get another ceasefire, and he said, many other things to do in order to stop the fighting. And when a reporter asked if he'd be prepared to bomb Iran to put an end to its nuclear program, he warned that if a deal wasn't reached in talks with Iran, Iran would find itself in a very dangerous situation. So the U.S. president spoke at length on other topics, including his and Netanyahu's delusional plans about relocating Palestinians and punishing China for taking countermeasures in response to Trump's high tariffs. Well, so when Trump says, well, we're going to hit you with 35%, and China says, well, we're going to hit you with 34%. And then Trump comes back and says, you have to be punished. I don't know. If you're like me, you kind of get a kick out of this stuff. Constantly entertaining. So President Trump's activated policy of drastically reducing U.S. imports from the nations around the world, including the global south, could very well blow out the world financial system. A lot of these countries' incomes and financial stability is based on selling their goods to the United States. And apparently, the world financial system is carrying something like $2 quadrillion in derivatives on its back. And whether or not Trump just means that what he's doing is some negotiating tactic or not, it's irrelevant to the hardcore reality of the processes that are currently in the midst of his hardcore dealing being released. So first, reducing the U.S. trade deficit in goods by wiping out 50% of the excess of their exports to our country over the imports from the U.S., which is the incompetent formula some of these advisors have given Trump, is going to lead to nothing but a short order in the wave of sovereign debt defaults from these global south debtor nations. They have certain financial arrangements, instruments that are called upon, in some cases weekly, some monthly, to be paid to the international banking system, to the IMF, to whatever else. And when they don't have the money, because they can't get their exports imported to the United States because they can't afford it because of the tariffs, they're going to default. And so the entire transatlantic system, under which your system of credit is based, was rigged from the outset. Back in August 1971, when we went from a gold reserve system to a fluctuating interest rate. Secondly, the U.S. producers are going to face a wave of bankruptcies as the cost of imported goods skyrocket, and they're unable to pass on these costs, and farmers, of course, are at the top of the list. Farmers can't just go out and farm without a lot of support from these other countries in the sense of fertilizer, seeds, implements, maintenance parts, whatever else, that we don't make here. And this goes back to the first problem I said. We don't have the equipment, the infrastructure, the raw materials that are necessary to get a production plant up and running that would make these things. So then there's the consumer debt. The consumer debt is going to be spared by any means, because with the kind of inflation that these tariffs are going to directly produce, you know, I don't know how your cash flow system works in your home. I know how it works in my home, and it's already strained. And I've noticed, not just in my particular specific industry, but in most of the healthcare industry, there's a slacking off of demand because people are a little bit concerned. They're putting their money somewhere else. They're letting their health care kind of float. And those who are living at the edge right now are going to just simply be pushed over. When you look at credit card debts, student loans, mortgage payments, I mean, you name it. So the argument of Stephen Moran, who's a protege of the notorious Reagan economic advisor Milton Friedman, and other Trump advisors, is that an international recession, and I think the word controlled disintegration would be a better appellation, is going to be induced into the United States this way, and the Fed is going to be forced to drastically reduce interest rates once again, and foreign and domestic holders of the Treasury debt will be stampeding into trading it for the new century bonds, the 100-year bonds, at very low or zero interest rates. So some are claiming, well, this is going to lead America to a renaissance of production and manufacturing again. Well, as Hamilton made it perfectly clear in his day, protective tariffs for infant industries only work if you have abundant directed credit flowing into manufacturing and other industries, which came from the First National Bank, and technological advances to ensure the increase in physical economy production. In other words, you move from wood to steel. So in the United States today, laboring under Wall Street and City of London's $2 quadrillion speculative bubble, you have neither directed credit, and I don't see any technological progress, except maybe in the sense of artificial intelligence. And the only thing these current policies are going to produce is controlled disintegration. It's going to fall apart, but it's going to fall apart slowly, combined with a financial bailout, which is, of course, London's policies. So this extremely explosive international environment in which the collapse of the stock markets and the looming danger of war with Iran are the two hottest items I think I can think of to talk about this morning. I had this image in my mind that I've only been giving you half the picture. The other half distilled in my mind quickly this morning. But I've only given you half the picture of all of these B-2 bombers showing up at Diego Garcia and the K-135 tanker haulers and the tankers and the AWACS and everything else that's showing up over there, plus the incoming aircraft carrier groups, so that there's 3 aircraft carrier groups, some of which can launch F-35s, and then, of course, F-35s can be launched from several land-based airways in several European Union countries. And the other half of that picture is Iran has hypersonic missiles. And I don't know how many nautical miles or kilometers it is from Tehran and that area to Diego Garcia. But how fast can you scramble B-2 bombers with the threat of incoming hypersonic missiles that are flying in even the Oreshnik, and I don't know for sure. I've seen some discussion of what kind of hypersonic missiles Israel has, because they tested them in that last missile attack on Israel here a few months ago that was very successful. It hit their targets. They couldn't stop them. And fortunately, for the Israeli citizenry. They were only targeting military targets, which were the military bases that the attacks on Syria came from, tit for tat kind of thing. And so as I was laying there in bed figuring out what I wanted to talk about, that thought came into my mind. Good gracious. Remember what happened at Pearl on December 7th, 1941. And the mistake of having all those fighters out on the runway, out of the bunkers and out on the runway, that were just chewed to pieces by those Zero machine guns. You know, I should have been thinking more about, today is the opening day for Salt Lake Bees, our home baseball team here, out at the new stadium. I would love to go see a Bees game. I would love just to sit back and some peanuts or popcorn, Cracker Jack, cold drink, and watch a Bees game. Instead, I'm laying there thinking, holy smoke, they could pepper Diego Garcia with hypersonic missiles. Well, I'm sure I'm not the first one to think of that. The problem with hypersonic missiles is you can't shoot them down. You can't shoot them down any more than you can shoot down a bullet. Some of these hypersonics are moving 20 times the speed of sound. That they have to have special surface design on the nose of these missiles that when you're flying at 20 times the speed of sound. I mean, it's like flying through a wall because of the compression that covers the front of that missile's nose and the electrical, the ion buildup and the electrical problems that you've got to shield the directional control of the missile from the outside ion buildup on the skin of the missile. And Russia is making these things. According to one of the military leaders in the EU, they make more in a month than the combined military buildup of the rest of the European Union can do in a year, and they're not building hypersonic missiles. We don't have a hypersonic missile. We're developing them, but they explode. Anyway, I might elaborate on that a little bit more momentarily, but it's just that the danger of war against Iran is looming, and that is the one incalculable factor that could completely change everything. And I can only say in the liberal media, in a kind of a different direction, they are now starting criticism that the unmitigated violence and force of the IDF against the Palestinians in Gaza is way out of proportion. There are people who are showing up now in the news, doctors in these healthcare facilities. The hospitals have all been bombed, so they have some makeshift emergency centers where the hospitals used to be, or remnants of the hospitals still stand, and they're using part of it. And they said, we don't see any tunnels. We don't see any Hamas. We just see sniper victims. And so when the liberal press comes out and says, this warfare, this latest move by IDF in Gaza, which now apparently they control 50% of the Strip, is out of proportion, that's about the mildest characterization you can give for what's going on there. And as Netanyahu arrived yesterday in the U.S., meeting Trump after he had just had a meeting in Hungary, it's obvious, an open question of what's going to be the result of this. The IDF has already occupied, as I said, more than 50% of the Strip. And the population that is there now, the ones that were told they could go back home a couple of months ago and started marching back to the northern parts of Gaza, They're without food, without health care, without water, without anything. And it's just an absolutely unbelievable situation. And I can understand all of these campus protests everywhere in support of the Palestinians. I don't support breaking the law. I don't support fighting the police or throwing Molotov cocktails or bottles of water at the police or these kinds of things. But they have every right under the First Amendment, and on the colleges they have every right to be on the campus because those colleges are supported by American taxpayer money. I don't support their suppression of their First Amendment rights to protest. I don't support the altering of the definition of anti-Semitism to anti-Israel and the concurrent laws, of course, that go with anti-Semitism. I'm just saying that Iran said that they are ready to sit down for direct negotiations with the United States this Saturday in, I don't remember if it's Oman or Saudi, somewhere in the peninsula. And they're committed to diplomacy. They swear up and down they do not have a nuclear weapons development program. I think they're taking Trump's threats of bombing them into non-existence as a real threat. In the midst of the potential of just clouds and hurricanes of strategic escalation coming out of this. But now the most dramatic event that shatters the entire world, not just Iran. This started at the end of last week, but fully continuing yesterday and into today, is the collapse of the stock markets worldwide. It was all, as of yesterday morning, the U.S. market was down 5%. The Nikkei went down 8%. Hong Kong was down 13%. And then the DAX in Germany started collapsing to 10% before they closed it. And then it opened back up and started to stabilize a bit. But this is the third, yesterday was the third massive day in a row of massive losses that is absolutely massive. And it has wiped out, since the middle of last week when Trump announced the new tariffs, by almost 4,000 points in the stock market, for what that's worth. However, it is massive, and obviously it's not unexpected, but the big question is the very volatile, over-indebted financial system going to hold, while Trump is trying to do his absolutely massive radical attempts to reconstruct the entire world system, which is possible, but it's a run against time. And it's impossible to predict which is going to come first, his stabilizing of world economy or the collapse of world economy. You know, like, will Trump's strategy to renegotiate everything successful in time, or is the financial system volatile enough, as we've been warned many times it is, that things could start blowing up all over the place and bring the whole thing down? Now, I want to make a point that the key issue is, in order for this to work, the American economy has to go to the sound, proven principles of a physical economy. Remember when Goldspan, back under Reagan, said, in America, we no longer have a productive economy, we have a consumer economy. Why, he said, do we need to worry about making anything? Because we can buy it from China, or Pakistan, or El Salvador, where they're, of course, making things at slave labor wages, and it's here for us to take advantage of. A physical economy is where you make stuff. You actually make stuff, you sell that stuff, and the profits you make from that stuff, you increase the overall welfare of those who help you make that stuff and expand into making more stuff. And the stuff you're making is for the benefit of the country, not gambling chips to go to Las Vegas, but highways, roadways, waterways, airports, hospitals, schools, universities, production plants, energy centers, nuclear, hydroelectric, whatever else, so that the money spent on these things benefit everybody instead of well, there was a little station ID there. I guess we're okay. So the question is, are they going to go to sound principles of physical economy? And there's a little hint of that when Trump dropped the tariff threat to a particular car manufacturer in South Korea that said, all right, we'll come to Louisiana and build our plant over there. We'll build our car manufacturing plant in your country, and we'll source everything possible from your country, obviously the labor. And Trump said, okay, cancel the tariff. Now that's a move in the physical economy, or will Trump listen to the monetarist advisors who believe that an economy is based on the amount of money that you make? And his monetarist advisors who are around him, like Navarro and Stephen Moran. And I want to point out the fact that the press fact sheet that was published by the White House announcing these tariffs lumps in countries like China, Germany, for having unfair practices. And obviously, these are completely different cases. China, as the world engine for the last several decades, ever since Nixon went over there in the 70s and said, we want to do business. And the Chinese said, we want to do business. China has uplifted, as I've mentioned many times, 850 million people out of its 850 million of its own citizens out of poverty, creating a very large, actually quite middle class of 400 million Chinese. A class which is rapidly expanding, that spends money on things made in the United States that's imported into China. And it's extended the increase of wealth and income through the Belt and Road Initiative, that was the thing that sparked it, to a lot of other developing countries. And that way, having acted as the motor of the world economy for the last several decades, and that's very much different from Germany, which used to be and still is the third largest economy in Europe, that I mean, the suppression of wages that's going on in Germany right now is a disadvantage to German workers, of course, but also to other European countries that can no longer devalue their currencies anymore, because there's no, you hit zero, and this suppressed wage level situation in Germany represents a very unfair condition that even Trump mentioned. But I don't think he meant a criticism of that. But otherwise, the key question is, can you impose your will in this bullying way, as Trump is doing? Would it not have been much better to sit down and call a bit of an economic conference like the Peace of Westphalia that is sitting there in our history? The European history is a great icon of peace and negotiations and increased productive output and capabilities, where you balance trade balances by increasing the size of the pie. The perfect method for which to put on the table something like 1.5 billion jobs creation to overcome the migrant crisis, by investing in the joint ventures of the OASIS plan or the industrialization of Africa plan, where you work to overcome the differences in trade imbalances by increasing the size of the pie, meaning everybody gets a piece, everybody growing, and that way you can adjust the differences by a gold reserve system between these national economies and sovereignties so that nobody is left in the dark. Everything fair trade by the end of the year, not fair trade, fair exchange. And when you make the pie bigger, you have this great disadvantage that the poorest countries don't have to suffer the most anymore. Anyway, I think it's quite clear that Trump, and you know, sometimes I don't know that this is the right word, play stupid. A lot of people accuse him of being stupid. Stupid like a fox, crazy like a fox, that kind of stuff. Because I think he wants to dismantle the entire system that has been created by the neoliberals. And he definitely wants to, which is the opinion of Michele Geraci out of Italy. He wants to dismantle Trump, according to Geraci, and I've used his stuff on my show in the past. Trump wants to dismantle the World Trade Organization. He wants to dismantle the World Health Organization. He wants to dismantle the UN. He wants to dismantle NATO. And that's at least the opinion of Geraci, and he wants to take it all down and then step by step rebuild it by negotiations between individual countries. Now that sounds wonderful on the surface. Now, whether the method would succeed is very questionable because some countries react very negatively, like China, for example, which not only countered Trump's measure with another 34% tariff against U.S. imports on their own, but also they're putting very strict controls on rare earth minerals now, saying that the move demonstrated the country's determination to safeguard their own national security, and that Chinese rare earth enterprises will strictly comply with these measures, especially those items that have dual-use civilian and military applications. So it's very clear that China has leverages to counter all these extra tariffs that Trump wants to give to them. Now, we have deposits in our own country of rare earth minerals. In Montana, there's a lot. Idaho, northern panhandle of Idaho. I know this because of my mineral experience back before I went back to school. Russia, of course, has the highest amount. So obviously, in the strategic sense of things, which is in rapid flux every day, stuff is going to happen later this morning, this afternoon, that's either going to add to or take away from what I'm saying this morning. And the big question is, can Trump's efforts to come to a new normal relationship with Russia, can that be the starting point to also put everything else in order, given the extremely close strategic partnership between Russia and China, and Russia being part of BRICS? And this is in the minds of some of the Western economists, Western military strategists, people like McGregor, Colonel McGregor. The reason for the push for war is to stop the friendship growing between the United States and Russia, because the West doesn't want anybody to be a friend to Russia. They want to eventually encircle Russia, defeat Russia. I think all Russia has to do is set off another Oreshnik missile to let the rest of the world know who's sitting there at the bargaining table. Now, it's obviously a complicated process. I have a way sometimes in my understanding and delivery and presentation of simplifying things. But the visit of Putin's envoy, Kirill Dmitriev, while there is no coverage of this in the United States that I've seen, is basically the opening of the door of U.S. firms to go back into Russia and do business with Russia. You would think that would be on the front page of the paper, but it hasn't been mentioned. And Dmitriev made that statement just the other day. It would be very interesting given the fact that the German economy can only recover and come out of the plunge of the abyss it's been in since the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, in going back in business with Russia again. And if these insane actions against Russia would be stopped and gas deliveries being accepted again, and German firms going back into a strong supporter of the Russian market, which may be much more difficult given the fact that Russia has drawn the conclusion that these sanctions have basically cut itself loose from the West, orienting most of its trade now with the East. The whole idea of these sanctions against Russia was to bring Russia financially to its knees. Well, as you well know, that's kind of backfired. And so I should have mentioned earlier that the Iranian military has been put on high alert. I just saw that in the notes. And Iran has warned its neighbors in Southwest Asia not to support a potential U.S. attack. I should have mentioned that at the very beginning. Do not support the Americans. If the Americans attack us, don't support them. For the obvious reason that they themselves would then become a target. So that's kind of the battlefield that's out there right now. The biggest problem, which is now clearly coming to the forefront, is the coalition of the willing. You have all kinds of tensions going on in other places on the planet. But this coalition of the willing that's spearheaded by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Macron and looming Merz. He's not Chancellor yet, but he's about to be. At least he's aiming to become Germany's Chancellor. These people, and naturally whatever is left of the German Foreign Ministry, with Baerbock, that poor lady, they're continuously lamenting that the war has to continue. If the United States isn't going to do it, we have to do it. And Ukraine has to be supported at all costs, is an obvious way to sabotage the potential of a peace agreement between Putin and Trump over the Ukraine. Baerbock is still foreign minister of Germany. Excuse me. I need to mute. K-Talk was gone to station ID and news and commercials. So, but I'm going to continue here. Baerbock is still the foreign minister, and in a secret paper that came out, that she has written a memo in which she advised people not to ever let it become public. But it is an advice to all kinds of German institutions on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the liberation from Nazi rule, and if there would be official representatives of Russia and Belarus in Berlin and Brandenburg, that they would not be permitted to participate. I mentioned this last week. A fellow I take care of who's Ukrainian Russian, and I've taken care of him for a little while. And he brought his sister in last time, who is Ukrainian Russian. In other words, they were born and raised in the Ukraine, but in the Russian sectors. And she asked me, as we were, as I was, he mentioned to her that I was a talk show host, and she said, "What do you talk about?" And I said, "Well, I talk about world affairs, and focusing lately on Putin and Trump and the closeness of World War III and what's going on in the Middle East and everything." And she looked me right in the eye and she said, "Who won World War II?" And I said, "The Russians." And she got this surprised look on her face. Like, "What?" I said, "The Russians." And she said, "Well, specifically the Soviets." And I said, "Well, yeah, the Soviets. The Soviet army won the war." That's why the United States came in second. The Allies never could have beaten the Wehrmacht without the Wehrmacht having been wasted in Barbarossa, Stalingrad, and all the rest of that stuff, and then eventually lost its power in the east, and the Russians advanced until they had destroyed everything up to Berlin, and they finally took over Berlin before the Americans got there. And so Baerbock is saying, when we have the 80th anniversary of the liberation from Nazi rule, it's an interesting way to put it. Instead of the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, it's the 80th anniversary of the end of Nazi rule. She said, if there's any officials of Russia or Belarus who might be in Berlin on that celebration day, they are not allowed to participate in the celebration. And if they would appear in an unannounced way, she said, that the relative institutions use House Rule 17:051, and I don't know how to translate it. I was just looking it up. It just basically means that a simple security guard could kick out the highest ranking diplomats, which of course is a diplomatic insult of the highest order. Naturally, Russia's gotten wind of it, and they have responded very sharply, saying that Germany is following in the footsteps of their Nazi predecessors by reportedly banning Russia and Belarusian delegates, said Maria Zakharova, the spokeslady for the Federation. She said the very fact that the ideological heirs and direct descendants of Hitler's executioners will expel Russians from the Victory Day celebration looks like a very blatant insult. And so she said, however, Baerbock and her Einsatzgruppe are not original, but they're borrowing what they're doing from their predecessors. Well, that's pretty tough talk. But that's increasingly how the whole world is looking at Germany. And there was this article by Patrick Lawrence, a fellow whose Substack stuff I like to read. Germany, the lost man of Europe, is his article. And he's basically saying and discussing in various reports the crisis that now besets Germany, that it used to be known as the sick man of Europe. Now it's Germany as the lost man of Europe. And he has this rather comprehensive analysis of saying, how could this ever happen to Germany so quickly? And he calls up the memory of Willy Brandt and the Ostpolitik, and how this had been replaced by the virulent Russophobia, represented by such people as Friedrich Merz, who's about to become chancellor, maybe. And I just wanted to mention this, that the image of Germany is becoming a very big topic around the world. And that's why this 80th celebration may be extremely important. And that Russia is still, now the Russian ambassador in Berlin, Sergei Natsyev, called the present behavior of the Germans, speaking of their need to be war ready, as a militaristic psychosis. He said Russia is still not yet in a state of war with Germany, but already now there are German artificial intelligence drones killing Russian military at the Ukrainian border. And the Russian ambassador in Berlin, Natsyev, says that the planned defense expenditures in Europe represent a big security risk for Russia, because Europe has simply become a war party, because the militarization of Europe is running at a very high level, and what is driving people in Germany is a militaristic psychosis. 67% no longer of Germans, 67% no longer trust the military protection from the United States. 67, that's almost 7 out of 10 Germans. You know, there's several American bases, starting there at Wiesbaden. There are several. All right, let me see if they're going to especially in Wiesbaden. And the 50%, and in that same poll, 50%, 56% of the Germans have a very high worry factor that it's going to come again to a big war. However, there is the beginning of a rebellion coming from even in the Christian Democrat, the ruling, well, it's the ruling party of the German government right now, but it's got less than 30% approval. Basically, the turnaround of Merz, where he has led to a situation where the Christian Democrats and the alternates for Deutschland are at about the same level of 24% each. And the AfD, the alternate, are the Trumpers of Germany. Wow, they probably wouldn't appreciate me saying that, but it's kind of the right wing of Germany. They almost got the majority in the Bundestag, and so many of the members of the CDU have left the party because they think Merz is committing treason. Merz was the Black Rock representative in Europe, and now he's trying to get as Chancellor of Germany. So the German citizens are smart enough to realize what that means. Anyway, this whole idea of trying to militarize Germany, where I was talking last week about where the German law has been changed to allow young uniformed members of the Bundeswehr, the German army, to go into high schools, trying to get the 17-year-olds to skip college and go right into the military. So even though these attempts to try to remilitarize Germany aren't working very well, because in one German report I was reading, it takes 7 years to build a military barracks. I mean, that's absurd. Why does it take 7 years? Because the bureaucracy is still blocking everything. I mean, you in the news this morning talking about the staff shortages at the national parks here in Utah. And it's simply the bureaucracy that's in place that allows these things to happen. Now, hopefully our new Secretary of the Interior can get these things taken care of, because the local economies that exist around these national parks depend on tourists getting into the national parks. It's just Economy 101. And so when I see this report that for a military barracks, which would be the expansion of some existing military fort, not just one barrack, but all the buildings, takes 7 years, then I think about the red tape kind of bureaucracies that exist in this country, inside the EPA and inside the Bureau of the public land stuff. You know who I mean. In order to get a mining permit, what you have to go through. So the person who's in charge of supplying the army its logistical requirements in Germany and getting production going for this idea to rearm Germany to be ready for war with Russia in 2029 says it is going way, way too slow. The firms that are not buying into the anticipation. They're waiting for every stop of the bureaucracy to be every step of the bureaucracy to be taken. Once you start moving against a bureaucracy whose only reason to exist is to make it difficult for you to get anything through the bureaucracy. I mean, they used to exist in an altruistic kind of concept that they were protecting something. Now they protect themselves, hence Doge and what Musk is doing. But there are those in Germany who are crying out, the Russians are at the door. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. Did you ever see that movie back in the 60s? Jonathan Winters, I'm thinking of him. It's still available out there on Netflix or somewhere. The Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. It's a comedy. And this Russian submarine gets stuck in a sandbar or something like that off the coast of, I don't know, Maine, Massachusetts, something, in a small fishing retirement community. And they want to get out of there as fast as they can. But it just, you get this Romeo Juliet kind of thing where one of the Russian seamen falls in love with one of the girls in the town. But there's this scene where when they finally realize there's a Russian sub off their coast, and Jonathan Winters is just going nuts. We have to get organized. First, we have to get organized. We have to get organized. We have to. It's just, I still remember seeing it as a teenager, and it's a comedy. It's a romantic thing. It ends beautifully. It's a wonderful story, and as I said, a great comedy. And that's what I see going on here with Germany. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. And fortunately, most of the Russian public is waking up to this nonsense, this insanity. And of course, Baerbock and Merz and the others are driven by the market demands for the military-industrial complex to sell every last bullet they got to rearm Germany, which is why von der Leyen is saying we need 800 billion euros to rearm Europe as the coalition of the willing, because if the United States is going to pull out of the Ukraine, we've got to go do it. So there is a series of podcasts, alternate news sources. They have it in Germany just like they have it here in the rest of the world. And there's this one person from Baden-Württemberg, the state of Baden-Württemberg, and he is writing an open letter to his children, and this was published in the German press. And I'm not sure, I don't know exactly who this person is, but he writes an open letter to his children saying that in light of the military preparations that are going on in Germany right now, he said this: I can only write to my children to emigrate from Germany as quickly as you can, because of the whole discussion of making Germany war ready, which is against our Constitution. I do not want to be among the parents who have to dig the graves for our children, so please emigrate while you can. Does that remind you any of the early 1930s in Germany? My German teacher, Frau Nelson, Waltraud Nelson, a member of the German youth, was hauled out of Germany physically by her father, who was offered, he was an engineer, military engineer. And of course, if the Germans had caught him leaving Germany, he would have been shot. But he managed to get out through the Netherlands. And he had to drag his Nazi youth daughter, 16 years old, forcibly to get her out of there. And she just the stories that she would tell us in German class, in our German class. I took 3 years of German in high school, and just fell in love with the culture and the religions, the Catholic or Lutheran, depending on what part of Germany, and wanted to go there on an LDS mission. I ended up in Ontario, Canada, but she talked about how she was dragged out kicking and screaming against her father, and how grateful as the days went by that he did. And by the time I made it into her class, and she had to be in her 60s, long gone now, of course, just an absolute proud, staunch American citizen. But she taught us the culture, taught us the religion, taught us the customs, taught us the food, the dress, the history. So I came out of that class just loving, not just the language, which some people think is kind of harsh. I think it's beautiful. And the effect her father had upon her. So when I read this, and I have no idea who did it, but it was on radio. Get out now, or you'll be digging the graves of your children. And there's a lot of other articles, and there's a bunch of experts, scientists of different kinds who finally come out with an open letter attacking the war mongers who are appearing on all the talk shows and about the absolute secure pending war with Russia. Now it's important for everybody to speak out. And for example, there's this one popular so-called philosopher who appears on a zillion talk shows. And Brecht, B-R-E-C-H-T, Brecht is his name, and he's come out, called this entire warmongering mass insanity. And he says it reminds him of the excellent book by Christopher Clark called The Sleepwalkers, How Europe Went to War in 1914. So anyway, I'm just kind of describing to you in detail because I think this is the atmosphere in Germany, but it's the atmosphere in several other countries. And I think it's the atmosphere here. And now the Interior Ministry of Germany is demanding that there should be war training in the schools to prepare for a possible war, civil defense, things like that. There are those of you listening now of my age, you remember the alarms going off and we had to crawl underneath our desks because of an impending nuclear attack. I remember that. You know what? I'm sitting here at a desk talking to you, and I can remember exactly where I was sitting in my second grade classroom. No, my third grade, Mrs. Burton. I remember where I was sitting in my third grade classroom. It was the second row over from the windows, about 2 or 3 seats up from the back, when one of the alarms went off. And I have a word for these people, some of my classmates. I mean, what are we in third grade, 8 years old or something like that? And I remember, I skipped a grade. I went into first grade and came out second grade. I don't think my parents should have done that. I think they should have left me with the group I was in. But I skipped a grade. I think it's because I was so obnoxious the teacher couldn't put up with me anymore. But I remember going around the classroom helping children learn how to add. And she would tell me to sit down and well, that's another story. But I could remember when the alarm went off and everybody scurrying around the classroom to get under their desk. And I remember thinking, how stupid. You think getting under the desk next to all these windows is going to make a damn bit of, I didn't say damn back then, a damn bit of difference if the nuke goes off here at the Patuxent Naval Test Center in southern Maryland? I was always a recalcitrant soul, even from the very beginning. And all you had to do was tell me something, and immediately I had to find out what was wrong with what you told me. And so this reminds me of that. The Defense Ministry wants to go into the German schools and get these kids ready for war. That's how unstable this stuff is. And it could happen that there could be no government of Merz because he's losing popularity in the parliament, in the Bundestag. And there's supposed to be elections this summer to finally establish to establish the new government. Anyway, all right, there's commercials playing at K-Talk, so I'm going to go on here. There's a growing number of people in the CDU that won the elections that want to join hands with the AFD so that they can get a majority. That's probably unlikely, but because the CDU wants to get war ready, the AFD wants nothing to do. The AFD wants nothing to do with war. Now, here in the United States, there is supposedly, at least the last number that I saw, supposedly over 1 million people demonstrating against Trump. And they're demanding hands off of NATO, which shows you how insane some of these demonstrators are. Obviously suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. They didn't demand no to Iran war. They weren't demanding no to Gaza genocide. They're demanding hands off of NATO. And now you've got Al Green, the sainted gentleman who was hauled out of that meeting there in Congress, yelling at Trump during his presentation, demanding Trump's impeachment. Now, obviously, there's a lot of criticism of Trump because of his measures so far, and but I'm kind of wondering how far can he go before there's some Republicans who are worried about their re-elections in, I mean, this is what? This is April? A year and a half? I mean, just a year from now, campaigning will be heavy for the midterms. How many of those Republicans are going to hold on to those seats? Well, an awful lot depends on how these tariffs and everything else work out as to whether the citizens of the United States are done with Trump a year and a half from now. And you get a Democratic majority back in there that'll throw Trump out in 2 weeks. So in Rome, there was over the weekend a demonstration, according to the organizers, of over 100,000 people against the EU, as compared to a meager 5,000 that showed up a week before supporting the EU. In France, there were major demonstrations for Le Pen. Thank you, I'm glad to see that. And all the signs are that the popular upheaval everywhere is very big, and the world is beginning to become very polarized. So what could happen is that the EU, as a result of this, could disintegrate, because it's reported that Merz, if he becomes Chancellor of Germany, has already made a paper to punish Hungary, and Hungary has made an agreement with Serbia, being a NATO country making a military agreement with a non-NATO country, is a disintegration of the EU. Now, what's all that make? Well, well, they're trying to keep the coalition of the willing alive, because Hungary, I guess you could say Hungary is definitely pro-Russian, because Hungary wants to do business with Russia. And Hungary does not want Russian missiles, because of the pushing of the coalition of the willing, sending British and French troops into the Ukrainian borders, up to the Russian front, that's going to end up sending missiles all over Europe, as Putin has threatened to do, if they send armed insurrectionists, as he calls them, inside the Ukrainian border. So the effect of what is going to come out of Trump's measures against the deep state that he's day by day taking more advanced steps for, and all the layoffs, my goodness, 250,000 layoffs now, and which is creating a big turmoil. One has to see what's going to be the result of the discovery of all these documents that are coming out, the John F. Kennedy files, the other files of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. Oliver Stone gave an interview here recently where he said, "I hate what they did with Russiagate. I really do. I think it's, again, the lying, and selling it to the American people. The whole thing with hating Russia is so negative, it's so un-American. They're potentially our best partners. So are the Chinese. We have this mentality that they're the enemy. This is all inoculated by propaganda. And mentioning propaganda, I want to again mention something I saw here a week ago. Someone had forwarded it to me. I don't know if it was from X or what. But what I saw was this Chinese person in America, and didn't seem to be interested in association with some Americans on business or something representing China, and didn't seem too interested when the evening news came on to watch the news. And the American counterpart that was with him said, "Hey, here's our evening news. They're talking about China. You want to see this?" He says, "No, I'm not interested." "You're not interested in world events?" And the Chinese fellow essentially or reportedly said, "In China, we never watch the news because we all know it's just propaganda." Wow, that kind of impressed me. So that's how I'm watching the news. Now, I know it's propaganda, but this was kind of a smack, kind of like a wake-up thing. So when I watch the news now, I was watching the news about this Christian school somewhere up this morning, up in the Northeast, and I think it's Connecticut, but I might be wrong. That refused to play a girls' basketball team with another girls' team because it had a man on the team, and you could see him out there on the floor, huge compared to the girls, but calling himself a girl, he's allowed to play in this girls' basketball game. Well, you can get hurt playing against somebody that big. So this Christian school refused to play the game. So we're not going to play a game that has a man on the floor. And what happened? The state government came down on them for that position. You're in violation of state law or whatever else. You will not be allowed to compete in any sport from now on in this state against any other team. And so I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, the propaganda behind this is so obvious, nobody could deny it. And then, well, anyway, that's just me. I just, it's just coming to a situation where almost every minute that goes by, there's some other, yeah, thank you for the comment. You love that show, The Russians Are Coming. I think of that now. You think of that now and then, so do I. Also hear a question, who do you think is advertising and paying for the demonstrations for NATO? Well, the military-industrial complex, the World Economic Forum. They don't want to lose control of these countries. And I suppose there's some other ventures in there, some other business, BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street and all these that hold tremendous positions in the military-industrial investments. I suspect that's who's doing it. So anyway, it's just kind of exciting how all of this is coming down. And I've got a few more notes here, but I think I want to get to some other things. But the demonstrations that are going on in some of the larger European cities, just amazing. I had a report here. DOGE has now eliminated 280,000 federal jobs in 2 months. impacting over 27 agencies. In the District of Columbia, about 25% of the workforce are federal employees, but city officials expect to lose 4,000 federal jobs, costing the city approximately $1 billion in lost revenue. And so the entire DC metro area is bracing for increased unemployment and losses in revenue. These figures, I'm quoting here from this report, these figures are not final since more cuts are expected. Yeah, I suspect that's probably true. The NIH, in their cancer breakthrough in jeopardy, because 2,000 job cuts, this is from Nature magazine. April 1st, the same day almost all the headlines coming out of the National Institutes of Health centered around the announcement of the second round of job cuts. Around February 18th, there was the announcement of cuts of 1,000 to 1,200 scientists, researchers, and other personnel from NIH. On April 1st, another 1,200 job cuts. The medical journal is detailing a promising demonstration by NIH scientists of using a person's own immune cells to fight certain types of cancer. Gee. Well, it's about time. Oh. They've announced a therapy to use the body's own immune system against cancer. They might as well have come out with a report that said, after months of detailed astronomical observations, we have determined the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Jeez. Of course your immune system is your biggest defense against cancer. The problem is when you have cancer and it's growing, the cancer doesn't know you are there, and your immune system doesn't know that you are there, or that the cancer is there. The cancer doesn't know you're there, your immune system doesn't know the cancer's there. So the trick is waking the immune system up. I think I'll talk about that tomorrow on the Health Show, because there have been sufficient discoveries in sub-Saharan Africa, and it was confirmed by a study at the Huntsman Center here in Utah 3 or 4 years ago. We know, or we have been told by certain oncology researchers, that if you live your life expectancy, let's say mid-70s to 80s, you'll have cancer half a dozen times in your life, but you'll never know about it because your immune system will have taken care of it. How did they discover that? Because when people were being examined in many different ways for some other problem, cancer was discovered. And as they decided to watch it in conjunction with some therapy for some other kind of a problem, the cancer was gone a few months later without any medical intervention on behalf of doing something toward the cancer. So they said, well, we figure 6 to 7 times in a lifetime. Why did it go away? Because of the immune system, of course. You have special cells called NK cells, natural killer cells, that are designed primarily to go after cancer. And they know in cancer after cancer after cancer, when they do the blood tests, the NK cells are AWOL. I'll talk more about that tomorrow. I just want to get back into the fact that the NIH is scared to death because of these big cuts, that it's going to be affecting the cell-based immunotherapy, which has been used for blood cancers like leukemia. And there's a plan to attack the more solid tumors. There's hard tumors and there's soft tumors. Soft tumors are of the blood. Hard tumors are the organs. Breast, lung, pancreas, colon, brain. Chemo doesn't work on those things. It slows it down a little bit, but it doesn't get rid of it. And so they are working on these processes of immunotherapy. And so there are cancer researchers inside the NIH who are coming out and saying, these patients don't have much time left. We can't cut this money. Like I said, I'll get into that tomorrow. All right. Oh, here's a crazy thing. The National Security Council, prior to yesterday's arrival of Netanyahu into the White House, a spokesman for the U.S. National Security Council, Brian Hughes, who tied President Trump to the ugly whitewashing of Israel's murder of 15 unarmed paramedics and aid workers from a team of the UN, the Red Crescent, and the Palestinian Civil Defense. Yesterday, Hughes said, quote, Hamas uses ambulances and more broadly human shields for terrorism. President Trump understands the impossible situation this tactic creates for Israel and holds Hamas entirely responsible. Meanwhile, in the unraveling of Israel's cover-up, yesterday an IDF official attempted some new denials. He denied that their soldiers had carried out any close-range executions. It's not from close, they opened fire from afar. There is no mistreatment of the people there, he said. It's just that the soldiers then approached the group that had shot, identifying at least some of them as militants, and in their eyes they had an encounter with terrorists. That is a successful encounter with terrorists. But he explained that the bodies were not hidden, as they had informed the UN that day that they somehow did not immediately come to take the bodies, these paramedics. However, the UN had said last week that the IDF has denied access to the area. Well, yeah, you're not going to come in and get any evidence against us. Who do you think you are? Finally, the official explained the bizarre burial of the ambulance that were crushed and then buried under the sand along with the murdered civilians. The IDF said, well, we just had to push them off the road to allow for traffic. Yet these vehicles in which these paramedics were arriving to take care of, from the UN, to take care of these shot to pieces Gazans, these Palestinians, they themselves were shot. And then their vehicles were crushed and buried under the sand. That's really going on. And they said that it was Hamas who killed the paramedics. Well, think about that. You have paramedics coming in to take care of the people the Hamas soldiers are apparently protecting, and they would kill the people who came to protect the people they're protecting? Chaz Freeman, who was a former high official in the U.S. State Department, who is a regular guest on the Napolitano podcast, Judging Freedom, spoke with Glenn Deason here the other day on the topic of diplomacy at an impasse. Trump escalates actions between Russia and Iran. And Chaz was describing the mismatch that exists between Trump and Putin, which he blamed on Trump not listening to Putin, what Putin has clearly demanded. Well, in other words, they're in a situation where they're trying to describe and get through some impasse over why Trump is not sitting down finally with Putin to listen to what Putin has to say about what's going to happen with the Ukraine. And what Chaz was saying, Trump is not listening to Putin because of Putin's clear demands. Number one, a new European security architecture. Two, a neutral Ukraine out of NATO. And three, a solution for the Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine. In other words, the Ukrainians have to stop shooting and bombing the Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens. So what Trump has been trying to go for are ceasefires, which have gone nowhere due to the rejection by Zelensky and the refusal of Europe to agree to lifting any sanctions. And now Trump threatens sanctions on third countries who buy Russian oil. And Chaz noted that when he joined the Foreign Service, the U.S. policy was to oppose third-party sanctions as illegal in denouncing the Arab boycott on sales to Israel. And then Trump doesn't want new relations with Russia for their resources. he does want new relations with Russia for their resources because he admires Putin as a strong man. Well, Europe is not going to support Trump. The transatlantic relations are destroyed. The U.S. leadership of NATO is dead. But Europe's current plan to sustain the war on Russia and Ukraine is even more of a pipe dream. I've said this so many times now. The UK's standing army is 70,000. And I've quoted other people, not me, it didn't come from me, other people, of course, that the British Army wouldn't fill an NFL stadium. You know what? The British Army wouldn't fill the University of Utah's football stadium. 70,000. The Russians have 700,000 on the front line. I mean, Europe has this total failure of vision as the leaders are fearing losing their positions. They ignore the views of their own populations. They ignore these tremendous demonstrations. Almost the number I think was 1 million in Stockholm here the other day. And they're following the United Kingdom's historic fear of Russia that goes back to the 19th century. Their policy is just bravado, bravado, without a plan for peace. But Trump has no leverage over Russia, and this is something that seems to me that Trump doesn't understand. He has no leverage over Russia. He has no cards to play with Putin. They've won the war. Now, what are they going to do with a 700,000 man front and another 1 million that are wanting to join the army now in Russia? China might react, but they most likely see the U.S. right now shooting itself in the foot, according to Chaz. And as to Europe rearming, he said, I learned in my time at the Department of Defense that it takes 20 years to build a division. Europe needs a political strategy, not a military strategy, and they refuse to pick up the phone to Moscow. Yeah. Just like Blinken and Biden refused to pick up the phone and talk to Putin or Lavrov. "20 years to build a division." I remember hearing Douglas McGregor, Colonel McGregor, and Scott Ritter talking about this very subject on the Napolitano's podcast in the past, and Ritter was very clear about it. You don't just grab a bunch of young people and put them through 6 weeks of basic training and send them to the front line. They're not ready for that. They'll just be grist for the mill. They'll be the latest new killed. It takes time to build up an entire division made up of companies and made up of platoons and they're actually war ready. On Iran, he was saying there's a distance between Trump and his subordinates who want Iran to be crushed. And he denounced Waltz's call for Iran to give up its non-existent nuclear weapons program, as well as their peaceful nuclear program, which is impossible, and even their missiles, which is even more impossible. They're not going to give up their missiles. They demonstrated their missile capability the last time Israel attacked them. Jeez. Iran is likely to decide it has to have a nuclear deterrent. And they have every right as a sovereign nation to do that, if they have the technological capability. Not because they want to destroy Israel, which I think is Israel's false view, but to defend against an attack from the United States. So he agrees that Iran could do great damage to the 20 U.S. bases in the region. You don't think the Iranians already have missiles aimed at all those U.S. bases? But neither the Pentagon nor Trump want a war with Iran, but Trump is surrounded by people who want a war with Iran. And there are those who are saying this is not an America first policy, it's an Israel first policy. And he calls the signal chat story amateur hour. He said allowing diehard neocon Jeffrey Goldberg onto the call, just amateur hour. On the Saudi roll, he said that when the B-2s were sent to Diego Garcia, the refueling planes were removed from Qatar, and none of the Gulf states want anything to do with a war with Iran. The Saudis are already distancing themselves from the United States, turning. That's a strange place for a station ID. It's not an Israel, it's not an America first policy, it's an Israel first policy. And then the Saudi role, as I said, that when the B-2 bombers were sent to Diego Garcia, the Gulf states are just, holy, holy, holy smoke, holy. They're backing up, their hands in the air. We don't want anything to do with this. And the Arab population, of course, as we've seen here recently in meetings in Cairo, absolutely irate over the genocide in Gaza. And as to Israel, the army is demoralized. The population opposes Netanyahu. Their economy is crashing, with 64,000 bankruptcies and mounting migrations, noting that 2 to 3 million Israelis were given Spanish and Portuguese passports to make amends for the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. What do we have going on over here? All right, I think that there was one thing I wanted to talk about, Russia. All right, this latest out of the AP, just one more thing about Israel and Gaza. Israeli forces are controlling more than 50% of the territory of Gaza right now. And what they're doing is they're squeezing the Palestinian population into ever smaller wedges of land, they call it. The IDF in the last 24 hours, I guess right now because of this news release it'd be 48 hours, has issued orders for people in central Gaza to evacuate. I talked about this at the beginning of the program. Get out. Where are they going to go? Israel's various operations indicate intent to erase the Palestinian population from Gaza altogether. And according to many reports, the Israeli strikes killed 17 people overnight, 32 people yesterday. And notably, a local reporter and another person were killed when the media tent outside the Nasser hospital was hit about 2 a.m. Yeah, bomb the hospitals. That'll get them out. The largest contiguous area that the Army controls is around the Gaza border, where the military has razed Palestinian homes, razed farmland and infrastructures to the point of uninhabitability, according to Israeli soldiers and rights groups. Israel claims that it's necessary to pressure Hamas into releasing the remaining hostages, but the land that Israel holds, which includes the Netzarim corridor that separates northern Gaza from the west of the Strip, could be used for wielding long-term control human rights groups. They destroyed everything they could. This is these are 4 soldiers talking to AP. They destroyed everything they could. They shot everything that looks functioning. The Palestinians will have nothing to come back to, and they will not come back never. A soldier deployed with a tank squad guarding the demolition team said. He and 4 other soldiers spoke to the AP on condition of an anonymity for fear of reprisals. Yeah, probably thrown into prison. A report documenting the accounts of soldiers who were in the buffer zone was released Monday by Breaking the Silence, an anti-occupation veterans group. A handful of soldiers, including some who spoke to AP, described watching the Army turn the zone into a vast wasteland. Through widespread, deliberate destruction, the military laid the groundwork for future Israeli control of the area. Yep, precisely. So, Trump's ultimatum to Iran is probably the big thing between now and when I'm back on again Monday for these topics. I'm still working on something with my office, in office promotion, that limits the opportunity I have of making smaller presentations here, but that is definitely what I want to do. Make a series of them, upload them, and then they'll be there, and as long as YouTube holds on to them. But the big thing between now and next Monday is Trump's ultimatum to Iran. Interesting enough, Colonel Douglas McGregor compares Trump's ultimatum to Iran to that which the Austria-Hungary coalition delivered to Serbia in 1914. An offer, in short, that could not be refused. Serbia accepted 9 out of the 10 demands, but it refused 1. And so Austria-Hungary immediately declared war. Now, on February 4th, shortly after his inauguration, President Trump signed the National Security Presidential Memorandum, that is to say, a legally binding directive requiring government agencies to carry out specified actions precisely. And the demands are that Iran should be denied a nuclear weapon. They are to be denied intercontinental missiles, which they already have. They're denied 2 other asymmetric and conventional weapons capabilities. And all these demands go beyond the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the existing JCPOA. And to this end, this National Security Memorandum directs maximum economic pressure to be imposed, that the U.S. Treasury act to drive Iran's oil exports to 0, that the U.S. work to trigger the JCPOA snapback of sanctions, which is supposed to happen later this year, but they want to do it now, and that Iran's malign influence abroad and its proxies be neutralized. Now, the UN sanctions snapback expires in October, so time is short to fulfill the procedural requirements for the snapback. But Trump's ultimatum to Iran appears to be moving down the U.S. pathway to where war is the only outcome, as occurred back in 1914, an outcome which ultimately triggered World War I. Now, there are those who say, and I kind of feel some similarity to it, that this is just another Trump bluster. Possibly, but it does sound as if Trump is issuing legally binding demands, such as that he must expect cannot be met. When you make demands on somebody that they're not going to do, usually a demand comes with "or else." What has been his "or else"? Because the Iranians are not going to abandon their nuclear program that continues to produce nuclear fuel for their nuclear reactors. And according to the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, the production of nuclear weapons is contrary to the spirit of Islam. And he has ordered his country, you do not make nuclear weapons. And then others say, well, that's Khomeini, for Pete's sake. What do you expect him to say? And it's the same thing they say about Putin. Putin says, oh, we're not going to attack Europe. We're not going to, we don't want to invade Europe. We're not even going to invade Ukraine any more than we have. We don't want to rule Ukraine. We don't want to rule Europe. That's not our aim. We just want to do business. But we're not going to have NATO in the Ukraine any more than we would sit still in this country and have China line the Rio Grande River on the Mexican side with long-range missiles. Well, what is the difference between these earlier Trump demands from a few years ago and demands he was kind of making not as president but as a presidential electee, possible candidate, and those he was making this February? Well, they're the same, except today he says if Iran doesn't make a deal, there will be bombing. It will be bombing the likes of which they have never seen before. So there is both history and the fact that Trump is surrounded, on this issue at least, by a hostile cabal of Israel firsters and super hawks that want to go to war with Russia. Witkoff is there, but I think is poorly grounded on these issues because it doesn't seem like Witkoff understands Russia. Trump, too, has shown himself virtually totalitarian in terms of any and all criticism of Israel in American academia. And Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, he's fully supportive of Netanyahu's far-right provocative and expansionist agenda, even into the illegal actions being taken against the West Bank. Now, we're going to be through here on K-Talk Radio any second. So I will be back tomorrow, K-Talk listeners, for a health show. And as K-Talk takes off here in a second, I will go ahead and bid a fond adieu to my streaming audience. But this is, between now and next week, is this meeting in Saudi over the bombing of Iran. This week is pivotal. This, again, a very, very important week. All right, I just shut down K-Talk, or I just closed myself off from K-Talk. And so I just want to talk to those of you who are still here. Am I afraid? No, I'm not. I'm not at all afraid. I feel very secure in the knowledge that things are kind of the way they're supposed to be. And the role that we play individually as human beings is the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is what you do, what you think, how you feel, and how you act upon that. In being able to support the role of humanity on this planet or act against it. So I appreciate your listenership, and I appreciate you being a part of this. If you can like, recommend, pass it on, share, whatever it is we do with these things to continue to build the audience, I would deeply appreciate it. And I deeply appreciate your listenership and being a part of the program. And Happy Fence, thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. Comments can be written here on the side screen of this presentation. So I'm going to end the stream. I'm Jack Stockwell at Global Affairs Unfiltered, Truth Without a Muzzle. I've known a few people that would like me muzzled. I will see you all tomorrow.